Hello, I'm Alice. I have a colleague who is deaf, and sometimes we speak using text, but sometimes we speak using sign language. And so before I came to Poland, I was like, hey, James, what's the sign for Polish, the British Sign Language sign for Poland? And he was like, it's this. And I was like, no way, you're not. It's that? And he was like, yeah, yeah. And that's like really impressive to me, because so far all of the signs that I've learned for countries have been kind of stereotypy. For example, the British Sign Language sign for French is this, like you're twirling your French moustache. And the British Sign Language sign for Greece is this. And the British Sign Language sign for Australia is this, which seems to be, pick these people up and put them over there. So, you know, congratulations, Poland, on having like, this is a good, that's a strong sign. Well, literally a strong sign, but also a strong sign. Anyway, this talk is not about sign language. So I'm from the Financial Times. We are the world's leading news organization on business and economic affairs. And I lead a project there called Origami. Origami is a 5-person team. We develop front-end tools and services. And we have 2 aims. The first is to unify front-end styles across the FT, and the second is to reduce time spent repeating work by developers at the FT. So we do this by creating and maintaining components, tools, and services. And there are lots of companies that have very similar projects to Origami. For example, Twitter has Bootstrap, and Salesforce has the Lightning design system. And Rizzo have, Lonely Planet have Rizzo, and there's this other company, FutureLearn, which is like a learning platform, and they have something called a pattern library, and it's got some very advanced design thinking. So when I'm thinking about things that Origami is doing, and the things it's doing well, and the things it's not doing so well, I often compare Origami to those projects and some others, and this talk is going to take you through some of that. And hopefully by the end of this talk, you'll have some ideas about things you can take back to your job, particularly if you're working with very complicated code bases. And you too can have an Origami. This talk is not about design systems, so it's a talk about how once you have a design system, once your designers have gone away and kind of thought about how design lives on your website, how the things you build to help other people who are building, in this case, Financial Times branded websites, how you take that design system and make it available to your developers. So this is essentially a talk about software. So first, let's just cover some stuff about the Financial Times. It's a newspaper in the UK. It employs about 2,000 people, and it's read by 1.9 million people every day. And we've been reporting on financial news for about 128 years. And this is our current website. This is ft.com. And this design is known as Falcon. And it's not responsive. And we've had it for about 10 years. And it's got a 3-month release cycle at the moment. And it's built mostly in Java. And there's some other stuff that have the Falcon design. This is a WordPress that our comms team used to write about, like it's sort of meta Financial Times, I guess. And this is a blog called Alphaville. And this is FT Chinese, which is a completely separate code base to ft.com and all that WordPress stuff, but a completely faithful replication of the Falcon design, with the exception of this cool QR code on the side here, which QR code is big in China, I think. So the FT has all of that sort of Falcon stuff, and then we have a load of other stuff as well. So we have an interactive graphics team, and they make a lot of, well, because a lot of our news stories are about data and financial news. Oh, that's cool. We have like an interactive graphics team that just turn out really, really quickly interactive news stories with a lot of graphs and a lot of stuff like that. And each of these pages is its own code base, and generally it's like a single page. But they deploy it very quickly, and they turn that stuff around from a Monday. They ship it by Friday, because they're working with the news cycle. We also have some other websites. So like part of the FT's business model is selling subscriptions into like banks and stuff. And so we have some B2C and B2B marketing pages that are just aimed at like like generating subscriptions. And then we have some stuff like this as well. So Falcon is like 10 years old, and this is pre-Falcon. This is the design from before that. And the copyright notice on this page, you can't see it, but is 2011. So that's the point at which they actually just gave up updating that. But this is the site you use if you want to order a physical copy of the FT to be sent to you. And I assume it's just extremely low cost to keep running, but I don't know how many people are actually like logging into this every day to get their physical copy delivered to them. Anyway, the FT also owns about 20 other publications with completely separate brand identities. That's things like Analyze Africa, The Banker, Investors Chronicle. These are all financial type publications. Mandate Wire, don't even know what that is. And in fact, so it's fair to say that I actually don't know how many front-end applications the FT has. It's that many. And I don't even think I could find someone who works at the FT that could tell me what that number is. Let's just look at the Falcon-like pages. So here is all the Falcon-like pages I could find, and they're like, or the sort of individual subdomains. And in theory, I should be able to change, like all of these have the same design, or should do. And I ought to, the Venn diagram of like design stuff and then like code stuff ought to be like a perfect circle for these sites. They ought to share a lot of code, and I ought to be able to change the code in one place and it update everywhere. But this is not the case. So this is our close button for an overlay on the Falcon design. You can see it all here. And this is implemented 4 different ways live on ft.com right now. So that one here is actually just a multiplication sign in a circle. I sort of admire the person who did that. It could have been me, actually, like a really long time ago. I don't know. I sort of thought of that, and then I was like, oh, don't look at the code. Anyway, so there are 4 different versions of this live on ft.com right now, and they should all look the same, but they sort of don't. And this just represents, like, it represents wasted work when that happened. It also represents wasted future work because we have to like maintain that, and that's really annoying. And that's just something we can control the design over, so it's up to us when we change that blue cross to be something else. We also have things we don't control the design over, like icons for social media, and we currently have 3 different designs for the Twitter logo, like a sort of like a timeline through Twitter's design decisions. And yeah, that's hard. Like, this is clearly hard to change. Some of those were added a really long time ago. Mark Bolton gave a really good talk at Smashing Conf about inserting design systems into difficult places. And if you're listening to this thinking you really want to hear about design systems, then you should go and see his talk, because it's the one you actually want. But he referred to brand identity as thingness. He also said loads of really smart stuff, but I'm only quoting the word thingness from him here, which is kind of a dick move, I guess. But anyway, so the FT's thingness is changing. So we're going from this is ft.com now, Falcon design, and we're going to move into this, which is our next generation, properly responsive, fit for purpose, fit for the devices and scenarios that people are accessing the FT. And we're probably going to, fingers crossed, ship this in September. We're currently moving about 15% of traffic to this site right now. And this is a huge opportunity for my team because it represents a generational shift in the way that we build websites. Because if I was to come along and be like, well, all of these 4 different button styles, that's really bad, we should change that, I could make a component system that would work, but it would be very difficult to get all of those front-end code bases updated, whereas they now all have to update because they're going to have to look like Next, which means that if I'm there with my tools like, hey, come and use Origami, then it's going to be really easy for them to do that, and then we've sorted this problem. So we've got this huge opportunity. And to remind you of Origami's aims, we want to unify front-end styles across the FT, and we want to reduce time spent repeating work. So that means less of this. These 2 colors are different. You can't really tell on this screen, but they are, and they shouldn't be. And also less of this, less of like repeatedly finding ways to position a small cross inside a blue circle. So I'm going to run through what's in a component system as I have defined it. Now, it won't be a long section of the talk. So the first thing you've got is components. And they're just bits of UI and front-end code to be used anywhere. You could probably imagine some components. Then Then you have tools. So those are tools to help people use components. So you're the tooling team, and you need someone to use some other teams to use your components. You need to create some tools to help people do that. And then finally, we've got documentation, and that just wraps everything and helps people understand what you're trying to do, make decisions, etc. So what I'm going to do in this talk is go through tools, documentation, and components, compare what Origami has with some other similar-ish projects, and see things that we could be doing better as we go. So starting with components. A component is some combination of CSS, HTML, and JavaScript. We have some components in Origami that are only JavaScript, like tracking. We also have some that are only Sass, like colors. And they all come together. Some or all come together to form a component. And then you have your components, and you mix them in with some application code, and then you end up with a website. This is not very groundbreaking. And then if you have lots of applications, then you have lots of application code, and it all comes in and makes a website as well. So let's have a look at an Origami-specific example. So we have, this is next. And this is our ads component, and our header component, and our icons component, and those are icons too, and our date component, and those are dates, and our typography component, and those are typography. And so that's ads, header, icons, date. And then we also have a grid component, tracking, colors, and buttons. And then we have this other site, the Banker. And they have a separate brand to ft.com and Next, so they're not going to use this kind of salmon pink, which you can't really see on this screen very well, but they can still use some of our other code. So they also use ads. It's very boring to write an ads component, so we find like some of our really popular components are just things that no one can be bothered to implement themselves. We have the header as well, typography, and then we also have the grid here as well. Nobody likes implementing responsive grids except Klig. The other thing about our modules is that they're composable, so you can have colors, grid, forms, and icons all come together with some extra stuff, and then you have a header, and that looks like that. The problem with having composable icons with different version numbers is you end up with a sort of dependency tree that looks like this, which is a bit of a nightmare. The thing about components for me is they're probably not that interesting. Everything's a bit kind of obvious. And there's also like tons of overlap between the components you would build in Origami to the things that are in Rizzo and the things that are in FutureLearn. So although they're like the core, like the heart of Origami, they're also kind of obvious. The thing that is interesting and changes much more between two different companies, I guess, is the tooling that you would build. So we have this nice diagram about how to do maths to make websites. But this is actually really hard. There's a lot of complexity hidden in this plus. And so what you need for that, to resolve that complexity, is tooling. Let's sort of roll back a bit. So this is your first simplest case, your case 0. You have a single website, but you also have a pattern library. But actually, you're only creating one website. So I mentioned FutureLearn at the beginning. This is kind of what FutureLearn have. So they have a pattern library that's got some really advanced design thinking, and it's very impressive to me. But their actual technical stack is incredibly simple because all their modules, documentation, and product code all live in the same repo. So instead of having a need for this plus, they've just kind of eliminated it, and now it looks like this. And this has some really significant benefits to FutureLearn because anyone can work on their component system without having to set up another app, and it's super easy to keep up to date. And it works the way everyone expects it to because it's just, well, that FutureLearn site is a Rails app, and they just kind of use partials and do everything in a Railsy way, and everybody's cool with it, and it makes a lot of sense. But this is not going to work for you if you have more than one application that you want to consume your component system. This is obviously the case at the FT. So this becomes hard again. And now you have to think about tooling. So you basically need tooling to do three things, probably. take your JavaScript and maybe minify it and sort of chew it up and make it web ready, and do the same for your CSS or Sass if you're using that. And then you also want a way to get your HTML for your components into your project. But you still want to have that single source of truth, as Harry was talking about, with your components system existing outside of your application. So if your sites are just using the same languages, then this is hard. You still have to write some tools, but it's not super hard. Because you can just make a system that will work for that one stack. So for example, if everybody's writing Rails or some sort of Ruby, using some kind of Ruby framework, you can use a gem. And that's an excellent way to deal with this problem, because everything works as you think it's going to for your application developers. They're all super happy. You only have to maintain one tool, and it's a gem. And this is what Rizzo do. So Rizzo v1. Rizzo is currently being rewritten to be v2, and they're using React and some stuff. But v1 is like when I first read about, when you read something and afterwards you're like, that's so obvious. But the brilliant thing about it is that it's so obvious, like, just makes so much sense once you've... Anyway, so they made this gem. So then as an application developer, your step becomes gem install Rizzo, and that makes sure all of your CSS and JavaScript's in the right place and ready to go. And then you can just do partials like this, which is exactly the way that people writing Rails apps think partials should work. It's how partials work in Rails apps. And you can express your use case by passing in values there, like the label search. And that's incredibly neat. So you've done JavaScript, CSS, and HTML, and all you did was a gem. And everybody likes using it because it's in their native language of the application. This is also how gov.uk, where I used to work, this is how their component system works too, and that was inspired by Rizzo as well. The problem with this is that it relies on all of your sites using the same application language. So if all of your consuming applications aren't in the same language, then we have this thing again. This is actually, I know I've been saying this is quite hard for a while, but this is genuinely the quite hard part. Because you have two options, as far as I can tell, and they're both bad. The first one is you write a tool for every language. So you have a Python egg and a Ruby gem and a Java bean or whatever the Java developers want. And that's a lot of work, because you need experts in all of those languages to maintain that sort of templating adapter. And the thing with writing tools is that you're now writing sort of tools for your tools, but it's sort of, tools are all in service of a different thing, right? So the time you're spent writing tools is not the time you're spent building the thing or doing the thing you actually want to be doing. And so it's sort of all part of the same optimization and business, and tooling is great, but also like the thing you want to be doing is making the components and making them really good, because those are the things that you feel like are going to have an actual impact on your users. So option 2, though, is also bad, which is just drop HTML delivery, lose templating. And that's... So you can resolve CSS and JavaScript quite easily. You can use a link tag and a script tag in the head, and then maybe write a CDN that will just deliver JavaScript and CSS. Or you can get your developers to use Bower and NPM to move your JavaScript and CSS around the place. But if you want to use templates and you don't want to write all of your templates in JavaScript, then there's really no good way to let people include customizable templates into their projects. So you have to tell users to copy and paste, which is such a bad idea. Like, when people copy and paste, they tend to leave off attributes that they don't understand, and those are always the attributes that are less well understood, obviously, but like ARIA, for example, and microformats, and they're usually quite important. You can never change a class name again, so you've now created this API, and any changes to it you can't automatically update or fix. You can't automatically push out changes to components that have HTML or markup changes in them, because your implementing projects have to make changes themselves. You're duplicating code everywhere. So as far as I can tell, there are just no really good, neat options here. Sorry. So your two options are build and maintain a tool for every language, drop HTML distribution, not good. So Origami has chosen option 2 there, which is to make people copy and paste templates. And we do really feel this strain of having to manage, like, particularly the classes thing is really annoying. We do have a plan for this, which is that web components, the web component spec will really help us with getting HTML into the places it needs to be. Custom elements will be pretty cool, and we'll be able to, like, and it just seems like a really natural and neat solution to this problem. And I think people will really find it very easy to understand, regardless of what their background or their preferred scripting or like server-side language is. But for now, we're here, so no HTML for Origami users. The thing we have managed to do, and I think is quite good, is solve CSS and JavaScript. And we've made something called the Origami Build Service, which is basically a CDN, only a bit cleverer. So you can include an Origami component in your page if you work at the FT by doing this. And then that's the Origami Build Service URL. And then you can choose CSS. And then you can include the modules that you want and a semver range for the versions that you want to use. And it's pretty much the same for JavaScript. And the build service takes any combinations of modules and returns their CSS and JavaScript to you. And we concatenate module Sass, run auto prefixes, compile it, minify it, and return it. And then we do the same, equivalent steps for JavaScript. And people really love this. And I think they like it because it's so natural to them, and it's so simple because you've just taken, we're doing a lot of complicated stuff with the JavaScript and Sass, but they just have to include a link tag and a script tag, and it's like the very sort of natural language of the web. And we've also, in doing that, we've sort of sidestepped any complexities around templating languages for that application thing. So it really does work. It's incredibly flexible, and it works for almost everything. We have about 239 million requests to the build service a month, and that's about 9 terabytes of CSS, JavaScript, and fonts served via Akamai, which is good. But some people do want more control. So the problem with using the build service is for a module, you get all of the Sass. And so you can't do any kind of critical path rendering optimizations for your project if you're using the build service. And you can't use mixins, or Sass variables, which is a problem if you're using colors. Like, nobody wants to mark up all of their stuff with the actual class name of the color they want. That doesn't really make any sense. So for some people, we took the code that powers the build service, and we made it into an NPM module. And those are called the Origami Build Tools. And so ft.com has a release cycle every 3 months, and they use the build service. And this is really cool because we've just sidestepped their 3-month release cycle now. So they're like, oh, we've got to wait 3 months till this thing. We've got to put it into our backlog. We've got to prioritize it. But because they're just including Origami modules with a semver range in the head, that means that we can just release changes to their CSS really quickly, and they don't have to do anything. But then for next.ft.com, who are building a new, very modern, very cutting-edge website and doing all of these kind of performance enhancements, like critical path rendering, they use Origami's build tools, and they actually wrap Origami's build tools in some more build tools and then some more build tools to achieve the things that they want to do. So we have these really good tools that mean that no matter what your release cycle is or your tech stack or who's maintaining your project or anything like that, you can still use Origami, and it's pretty solid. But that's not enough. So the final thing to talk about here is documentation. So at the FT, and it's kind of fitting because we're a financial publication, we have this concept of free market software teams. And Matt Chadburn, who is the principal developer for Next, wrote about this. He said, the teams are allowed and encouraged to pick the best value tools for the job at hand, be they things developed and supported by internal teams or external teams to the company. And so that means that Origami, although Origami is only written for people at the FT, we are effectively competing with everyone or the option to not use Origami at all, which is actually more of a kind of threat to us, because when you're making a component system and tooling for everyone, it means that sometimes you can't prioritize individual developer needs. And then they just go, oh, I'll just write my own gallery widget. It's fine. But this keeps us really focused, and this sort of competitiveness is very positive, I think, in the mainstream, because the counter is really terrible, which is that you're forced to use tools that you don't want, and the team that's building those tools, they can be lazy about the stuff they do, and they don't make ruthless decisions about their product, and that's like bad. And that is what the FT had for a long time before we started trying to empower people to make the right technology decisions on their own. So when I joined the FT in October, I did some research. I came from government where we did a lot of user research, and I got to the FT and I was like, going to do some user research here. And I interviewed people around the business. I talked to developers and designers and product managers and even some journalists to see what they thought of Origami. And the reason I talked to not just developers is because Origami, you should be able to use it to prototype stuff, I think. And so if we can make the bar low enough that a journalist can use Origami to make a web page, then I think we've really succeeded for everyone. I think that benefits everyone with more technical confidence than journalists. And what people told me was mostly positive. I had to add this slide because otherwise I forget to say it, and the next bit makes us sound really bad. But I did discover one problem, which is that our documentation is confusing people. So this is our doc site, and we have like getting started guides on there, and we have a component specification with which all of our components comply, and it means that other people can make Origami components as well, and everything's interoperable and nothing messes with anything else. And then we have the registry, and then we also have, every component has a SAS doc and README. But this is the response from our users, which was, how the fuck am I supposed to find time to read all this stuff? Which is a good point. And then more kind of diplomatically, I just wish it was more like Bootstrap's documentation. So this is Bootstrap's website. I've probably all seen this. And it is good documentation. It has this getting started page, which adheres to the sort of principles of an inverted pyramid. It's broad at the top, lots of information for people who don't really know what they're looking for, and then it gets more specific as you go further down the page. And this is like a thing journalists use to write stories, but it's quite a sort of decent guiding principle for documentation as well. The thing is, Origami is as easy as putting a link tag in your head. So the idea that anyone is like, oh, Origami is too hard, is kind of just shows that we were like really messing up documentation. It is as easy as Bootstrap, but you really wouldn't know it looking at our docs. Another thing, well, actually, my favorite documentation site at the moment is the Polymer site. I don't know if any of you have really read very much of this, but it's like really very well written, and it's very obvious to me, having now written a lot of documentation, that like this, someone's really tried very hard, and they've thrown a lot of money at this as well, I think. It's fair to say. So we rewrote all of our documentation using the principles outlined in Django's docs, actually. Jacob Kaplan-Moss has a really good blog post about writing documentation, and it covers things like what to tell people, how to structure it so that people can find their way around, and also things like actual good grammar for using in documentation. And we now have a documentation style guide, just like we have a document that's the style guides for SAS and JavaScript. Like, it's kind of obvious. And that style guide includes things like avoid metaphors. Don't put metaphors in your documentation. People don't understand them. Don't trivialize ideas like simply do this, just do that. And also try and write in the active voice, which was a real headfuck for me. It took me a very long time to work out what was the active voice. So anyway, along the same track as documentation, you'll find marketing. Marketing is gross. But marketing is the way that you convince people to use your stuff without making them think too hard about it, which is seems like a good thing, right? The amount of marketing you have to do should scale with the number of users you have or want. So Bootstrap obviously is not like Origami in that it's available for everyone, and they would like lots of people to use it. The Lightning design system specifically needs marketing because actually the design system is a selling point of using Salesforce, because what happens with Salesforce is that you buy Salesforce into your company, and then you write these kind of Salesforce-y apps, right? So the Lightning design system actually goes so far with marketing that it has an actual video, like with some like cheesy music, of someone talking about how great the Lightning design system is, and that person works for Adobe, a customer of Salesforce. And then we have something like this. So FutureLearn have a mono repo, and their developers that write their pattern library are the same as their developers that build their application. So they don't even need marketing, really. But this is a very solid piece of marketing, and it's very, like, when I go to this site, I'm like, this must be really good. Such a nice website. Anyway, marketing isn't just about making pretty websites. At a certain scale, you'll also need a comms plan for new releases, and you should also publish your incident reports for when things go wrong. And this all may seem like sort of weird overkill for an internal tooling team, but with free market software where someone can just leave, this becomes really important. The good news about documentation is that it is not complicated, it is just hard. So you don't need like a brain trust of really smart people in a room like spending ages drawing, like, you ever see like science programs where they like draw on the glass, like they're doing some really complicated maths? That's not what documentation is like. Documentation is just hard, and you just need to spend much longer than you think you're going to on it to get it good. So those are my 3 points to take away from this. Firstly, well, components, I don't know, have some. Next, make the simplest tooling that will do the job that you need it to do effectively. The tools are not the end product, they are the thing that allows people to use your stuff. And then finally, like, really care for your documentation, because although you may not be in a free market software team situation right now, you don't ever know when someone is going to spring that on you. Thank you. That's it.